Everything changed the night I was ready to propose. The engagement ring rested in the inside pocket of my jacket, its weight somehow reassuring every time I touched it. I'd spent weeks planning the evening. The reservation at one of Charleston's best waterfront restaurants had been paid for, the flowers were already waiting there, and I had rehearsed the question so many times that it almost sounded natural in my head. I honestly believed I knew how the rest of my life would begin. Emma thought we were simply going out to celebrate our 4th anniversary. She had no idea I intended to ask her to marry me before dessert, overlooking the harbor where we had shared our first date. About an hour before I left my apartment, my phone vibrated. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another work message. Instead, it was a photo from a number I didn't recognize. There was no caption, no explanation, just a single image. Emma. She was walking through the entrance of a quiet lakeside resort nearly 2 hours outside Charleston. Beside her was a man I had never seen before. He wasn't just walking next to her. His hand rested lightly against the small of her back as they disappeared through the front doors together. I stared at the screen for a long time, waiting for my brain to reject what my eyes had already accepted. The ring was still in my pocket, but somehow, it already felt like it belonged to someone else's future. For almost 4 years, Emma had been the most certain part of my life. We never rushed into moving in together, but it hardly mattered. She had her apartment across town, I had mine, and by the 2nd year we spent so many evenings together that it already felt like we shared a home. Charleston had become our city. Friday dinners on King Street, Sunday walks along the Battery, weekend drives to Folly Beach. We had favorite restaurants, favorite coffee shops, and even a running joke about which neighborhood we'd eventually buy our first house in. Marriage wasn't some distant dream anymore. We'd toured wedding venues just for fun, compared mortgage rates, and talked about how many kids we wanted. Emma loved browsing home listings late at night, sending me links with captions like, "This kitchen has your name written all over it." I answered every one of them because I believed those conversations were pieces of our future. Looking back, the warning signs weren't dramatic. They were small enough to explain away. She suddenly had more late meetings at work. Weekend conferences appeared on her calendar with little notice. Her phone, once left on the kitchen counter without a second thought, was now always face down, protected by a new passcode she laughed off as a company security policy. Then there was Ryan, a regional sales manager she mentioned often enough that his name became familiar. He was organizing projects, leading presentations, solving problems. Every story seemed perfectly reasonable on its own. Trust has a strange way of filling in the blanks. Every inconsistency found an innocent explanation because I wanted one to exist. I wasn't ignoring reality. I was protecting the future I believed we were building together. I didn't call Emma after seeing the photo. I didn't send a message asking where she was or who the man had been. Instead, I sat in my apartment with the engagement ring still in my pocket and replayed the previous few months as if someone had handed me a different version of my own memories. Once I stopped looking at them through trust, every scene carried a different meaning. The canceled dinner because a client had flown in unexpectedly. The weekend conference that supposedly required everyone to stay overnight. The hotel charges that had appeared on our shared travel rewards account, dismissed as booking errors she promised to sort out later. Even the expensive perfume she started wearing wasn't something I'd ever given her. She had simply appeared with it one afternoon, saying she'd found a great sale at the mall. I remembered believing every word without hesitation. Ryan's name surfaced again and again in conversations that had seemed ordinary at the time. He was always traveling for work. He was always organizing meetings in other cities. He always seemed to be exactly where Emma needed to be. None of those details had mattered alone. Together, they formed a pattern too deliberate to ignore. By midnight, I realized I wasn't trying to explain one mistake anymore. I was staring at what looked like a carefully maintained second life, one that had existed beside our relationship while I had been busy planning an engagement and imagining a future that, perhaps, had already quietly disappeared. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. That night, I quietly canceled everything I had spent months preparing. The restaurant understood when I called and asked them to release the reservation. They offered to reschedule, assuming an emergency had come up. I thanked them, said it wouldn't be necessary, and hung up before they could ask another question. The florist agreed to refund most of the order since the arrangement hadn't been delivered yet. When I finished making those calls, I took the engagement ring from my jacket and locked it inside the bottom drawer of my desk. I remember staring at the key for a long moment before sliding it into a small envelope. It felt less like putting away a piece of jewelry and more like burying a future I had already started mourning. Surprisingly, I wasn't angry. At least not yet. Anger requires certainty, and I was still standing somewhere between disbelief and acceptance. I didn't want explanations because explanations couldn't change what I had seen. I didn't rehearse confrontations or imagine dramatic scenes. Instead, I sat alone in the silence of my apartment and accepted a truth I had been resisting for hours. The relationship I thought I was living in no longer existed. Whether it had ended weeks earlier or months before hardly mattered anymore. I had simply been the last person to find out. For the first time in years, I stopped planning a life with Emma and started wondering what my own life looked like without her in it. That realization hurt far more than the photograph ever could. Over the next several days, I stopped looking for answers and started paying attention instead. It was amazing how much became visible once I quit trying to protect the story I'd been telling myself. Emma acted exactly as she always had. Every morning began with a cheerful text wishing me a good day. Every evening she apologized for being busy and promised we'd make up for our postponed anniversary dinner soon. She spoke naturally about wedding ideas as if nothing had changed. I answered politely, never accusing her of anything, never revealing what I knew. The silence gave people room to reveal more than questions ever could. 2 days later, I met a mutual friend for coffee, and without realizing it, she mentioned running into Emma in Asheville the previous weekend. I smiled, nodded, and changed the subject. Emma had told me she'd spent that weekend helping her mother around the house. The stories couldn't both be true. The following afternoon, another friend uploaded photos from a charity gala downtown. Emma had insisted she skipped the event because she felt exhausted after work. Yet there she was in the background of several pictures, wearing the same blue dress she'd claimed had never left her closet. Standing beside her was the man from the resort photo. Someone had tagged him by name before removing it a few hours later. I didn't need to search anymore. The truth kept arriving on its own, piece by piece, quietly replacing every excuse I had once accepted without question. Until then, I had convinced myself the damage was personal. It was about a relationship, a broken promise, and a future that would never happen. That illusion disappeared the moment I finally learned who Ryan really was. He wasn't just a co-worker whose name appeared too often in Emma's stories. He was the regional sales director for a company negotiating a multi-million-dollar partnership with a construction firm where I managed operations. Our executives had already met with his team twice, and another round of negotiations was scheduled for the following week. Suddenly, the lines between my private life and my career vanished. If the affair became public, it wouldn't remain gossip between friends. It could spill into conference rooms, client meetings, and contract discussions involving people who had nothing to do with our relationship. Within days, I noticed subtle changes. Conversations stopped when I entered the office kitchen. 2 co-workers exchanged a quick glance after Ryan's name came up during a meeting. Nobody accused anyone of anything, but rumors travel faster than facts, especially when successful companies are tied together by ongoing business. I realized every decision I made from that point forward carried consequences beyond Emma and me. Whatever happened next wouldn't simply determine the end of my relationship. It could influence my professional reputation as well, and that meant I could no longer afford a single emotional mistake. 3 days later, Emma asked if we could meet. She suggested the little coffee shop where we'd had our first date, saying it felt like the right place to clear up a misunderstanding. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose the same corner table where we had once spent 3 hours talking about everything we wanted from life. This time, I carried only one thing with me, the unopened ring box. Emma walked in looking nervous but hopeful. She smiled when she saw me, as if she believed we were about to repair a temporary crack instead of burying an entire future. Before she could speak, I placed the small black box on the table between us. I didn't slide it toward her. I simply let it sit there. Her eyes locked onto it, and the color slowly drained from her face. "You were going to propose," she whispered. I nodded once. I was. Silence settled over us before she finally began talking. She explained that things had become complicated, that Ryan had just been someone who listened, that she had never intended for any of it to happen. Every explanation sounded carefully practiced, as though she had repeated it to herself long before saying it aloud. She spoke for nearly an hour, searching for words that might rebuild what had already collapsed. When she finally stopped, I looked at her calmly and answered with only a few sentences. I don't need every detail, Emma. I already know enough to understand the choice you made. Then I stood, left the ring unopened on the table, and quietly walked away. After that conversation, I didn't have to expose anyone or defend myself. The truth moved on without my help. A week later, Ryan's longtime girlfriend discovered messages he had forgotten to delete from a shared tablet they both used at home. Their relationship ended almost immediately. The breakup spread through his office before anyone could contain it, and whispers soon reached mine as well. Emma's name surfaced in conversations she never expected to leave private circles. People who had admired her professionalism suddenly questioned every business trip and every conference she had attended. I never corrected rumors, but I never denied the truth when someone asked me directly whether the engagement had been canceled. Friends quietly sorted themselves into different groups. Some reached out to support me, others stayed close to Emma, and many simply disappeared from both our lives. I accepted every outcome without argument. At work, I focused on the opportunity that had been sitting in front of me for months. The promotion to oversee operations in Nashville had once seemed impossible because I didn't want to leave Charleston while planning a wedding. Now there was nothing keeping me there except memories that no longer belonged to the future. I accepted the transfer the same afternoon it was offered. Instead of spending my weekends choosing wedding venues, I packed moving boxes, signed relocation paperwork, and watched the city I once planned to call home slowly disappear in my rearview mirror. Several months passed before I realized something had quietly changed inside me. I woke up one Saturday morning in Nashville, made coffee, looked out over a neighborhood that was still unfamiliar, and noticed I hadn't thought about Emma for days. The anger that had once sat in the background of every conversation had disappeared without announcing its departure. In its place was something far less dramatic, but much more valuable: relief. I finally understood that losing the proposal had saved me from losing far more later. If I had never received that photograph, I probably would have married her within a year. We would have bought a house, combined every account, built a family, and eventually watched everything collapse under the weight of secrets that had already existed before the wedding. That thought no longer frightened me. It reminded me how close I had come to tying my future to someone who had already stepped away from it. People occasionally asked whether I regretted walking out of the coffee shop instead of giving her another chance. The answer never changed. I didn't regret leaving. I regretted ignoring the small warnings because they delayed the truth, not because they changed it. For a long time, I measured that year by what I had lost. Eventually, I started measuring it by what I had avoided. The difference between those two perspectives was the moment I knew I had finally moved forward. A year later, I sold the engagement ring to a small family-owned jeweler just outside Nashville. The owner never asked why I was selling it, and I never offered an explanation. To him, it was simply another piece of jewelry. To me, it was the last physical reminder of a future that had never truly existed. I walked out with a check in my pocket and a surprising sense of closure. Every now and then, someone still asks why I left Charleston so suddenly. I usually smile and say that a better opportunity came along, which is true in more ways than one. The promotion gave me a new career, but the heartbreak gave me something far more valuable: perspective. I no longer think about the life Emma lost or the choices Ryan made. Those belong to them. What belongs to me is the quiet certainty that the night I believed everything had fallen apart was actually the night I stopped building my future around someone who had already chosen a different path. Sometimes the worst evening of your life is simply the first honest day of the next one.
That's the end of the story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos for you, so pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.